The envelope arrived without a return address. It was plain white, nothing noteworthy about it except the neat, deliberate handwriting that spelled out my name. I turned it over in my hands, my fingertips catching slightly on the precise folds at the corners. The postmark read Richmond, Virginia City. My chest tightened. I hadn't reached out to anyone back home in over 11 years. My breath hitched. There was only one person who would send me something like this. Behind me, the kitchen clock ticked, each second dragging out longer as I slipped my finger carefully beneath the flap. The paper inside was thick, weighted, formal, edged with a heavy black border and embossed lettering. It read, "In Memoriam Walter James Moore, 1952 to 2024. The floor seemed to shift under me, and I grabbed the counter for balance, the granite cold beneath my hand. "Mom," a voice called. I looked up to see Micah standing in the doorway, his tall, skinny frame throwing a long shadow across our cramped kitchen. At 11 years old, he was already starting to show glimpses of the man he would one day grow into. His eyes were thoughtful, his posture steady, a quiet strength in the way his shoulders squared, the same shoulders that, once upon a time, had tucked easily into the crook of my arm the night I carried him through the rain. "Are you going to go?" he asked. The words settled heavy between us, weighted by all the stories I'd kept from him, about his grandfather, about the night Walter Moore saw his battered daughter cradling her newborn and still chose his pride over compassion. "I don't know, baby," I said, my voice rough around the edges. I cleared my throat, trying to steady it. "It's complicated." Micah padded across the linoleum in his socked feet, silent and sure. He wore the Superman pajamas I had snagged on clearance last month, already riding up short at his ankles. "What happened when I was little?" he asked. I reached out and ran my hand through his hair, darker than mine but carrying the same stubborn wave. "You remember me telling you some of it?" I said. He leaned casually against the counter. "You said we needed a fresh start. That's why we moved to Knoxville." A fresh start. Such a soft way to cover up that night. I remembered it too clearly. The porch light casting long shadows across Walter's face, the rain plastering my shirt to my skin as I pleaded for him to listen. Brooke had watched from the window, silent. Travis's car idled in the driveway. He never stepped out. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." Those words had haunted every mile between Richmond and Knoxville, following me all the way to the women's shelter. "What they did was wrong," Micah said, pulling me back to the present. Sometimes it amazed me how much he could sense without ever being told. I folded the invitation carefully, pressing the corners into neat lines. "Yes, it was wrong," I said quietly, "but I built something out of that. A life. A career at the East Knoxville Library. A home, this tiny apartment, its second-hand furniture, its walls plastered with Micah's colorful artwork. Every month, I'd quietly sent money through Mr. Norman to help cover Walter's utility bills. Never enough for him to find me, just enough to let him know I hadn't stopped being his daughter. Even if he had refused to be my father, I still cared. I had even once driven back after hearing about his stroke. I stood lingering in the hospital hallway until Brooke spotted me and had security escort me out. After that, I mailed one of Micah's drawings, a bright, crayon-colored scene of a boy and his mother in a garden. I didn't include a return address. I just wanted Walter to know that his grandson had inherited his mother's passion for art. Now Walter was gone, and along with him, any remaining chance to hear the words I had longed for. I had spent the last 11 years convincing myself I didn't need to hear them. Outside our kitchen window, the sun was sinking, casting the walls in the same rusted orange glow as that night in Richmond. Micah touched my arm, his fingers warm even through the fabric of my sleeve. "I've never met my grandfather," he said softly. I looked at my son, this beautiful boy who had been spared the sting of his father's rage and his grandfather's rejection, who drew pictures of gardens he had never walked through and still believed family meant more than blood and obligation. "Some things need to be said," I whispered, "even if it's too late." The invitation felt lighter in my hands now, as though calling out the truth had lessened its burden. Maybe Walter had understood that at the end. Maybe that was why he had made sure I would know when he passed. I pulled Micah close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and the laundry detergent I always stocked up on during sales. Tomorrow we would pack. Tomorrow we would cross state lines to say farewell to a man who had, in so many ways, said farewell to us long ago. But tonight, I stood in our kitchen with my son in my arms as the sunset washed everything in gold. And I allowed myself to remember the father I once had, the man who had later chosen to close his door. St. Matthew's Methodist Church hadn't changed a bit in 35 years. The same red brick exterior, the same white columns where I had posed for baptism photos. Even the cracked third step from the bottom was still there, ready to trip the unwary. Micah's hand tightened around mine as we drew near. "Mom," he said nervously. "Just stay close, baby," I told him. Through the stained glass windows, I caught glimpses of movement. Dark figures arranging flowers, adjusting programs, preparing for the service to say goodbye to Walter Moore, my father. Brooke stood atop the steps in a black designer dress that likely cost more than my monthly rent. Her impeccable posture radiated hostility, like a weapon. Travis loomed beside her in a suit just as costly, his stance stiff and defensive, like a bouncer guarding an exclusive club. They had set themselves up as gatekeepers, but they couldn't keep me out anymore.
Not now.
The whispers began before we even reached the steps. "Is that Lindsay?" someone hissed. After all these years, the nerve of her showing up now. Mrs. Henderson, my old Sunday school teacher, turned her back on me as we passed. Mr. Phillips suddenly found his shoes endlessly fascinating, but it was Cousin Rachel's sharp gasp that cut the deepest. Once, she had been my bridesmaid. Once upon a time. We slipped quietly into the last pew just as the organist began the prelude. The polished wood felt cool and smooth beneath my fingers, stirring a painful nostalgia. How many Sundays had I sat between my parents here, studying the extravagant hats of Mrs. Miller, while my mother leaned in to whisper some wickedly funny remark that made me bite my lip to keep from laughing through the programs. The usher mumbled as he handed me a stack of papers, carefully avoiding eye contact. The paper felt heavy, luxurious. A black and white photograph of my father smiled up from the program. Not the recent image of Walter, his face slackened by a stroke, but the Walter from 15 years ago. Strong, stern, framed by birth and death dates. The text beneath celebrated his loving children, Brooke and Travis. Nothing more. Before I realized it, my fingers crumpled the edge of the program. "Look," Michael whispered, nudging me and pointing toward the photo display set up in the narthex. Foam boards held decades of family memories, Christmases, graduations, weddings. Yet something was wrong. In the Christmas photo from 1992, a noticeable gap yawned between my siblings where I should have been standing. My graduation photo was missing entirely. Even the old family portrait had been cropped, altering 4 smiling faces into 3. The organ rose into the familiar strains of Amazing Grace, my mother's favorite hymn, the one she used to sing while tending the garden, while stirring dinner on the stove, while comforting me after nightmares. Tears burned the backs of my eyes, and I squeezed them shut. A light touch on my shoulder startled me. Aunt Margaret stood there, her aged hand pressing warmly through my jacket. She said nothing, only gave my shoulder a single, reassuring squeeze before shuffling to her seat behind us. Mr. Norman caught my gaze from across the aisle and gave a small, kind nod. The service drifted past in a haze of eulogies, words about family honor and a father's devotion. Brooke spoke of Walter's unwavering commitment to his 2 children. Travis spoke about the enduring strength of family. Neither one spared a glance in our direction. But as the congregation moved toward communion, Mrs. Pearson, the church organist, passed by and discreetly slipped a folded note into my hand. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. "Your father spoke of you." It read, just 4 simple words, yet they cracked something deep in my chest that I had kept sealed for 11 years. The final hymn faded, and the congregation stirred, gathering handbags and jackets, preparing to leave. I rose and reached for Micah's hand, but Travis suddenly appeared, blocking our path with his book. "Came for the money," Micah muttered, pressing himself closer to my side. I raised my chin and replied evenly, "I came to say goodbye to my father." "Your father?" Travis let out a short, sharp laugh. You gave up that right when you walked away. No, I said, my voice calm but carrying. I gave up safety to protect my son. That's not the same. Brooke's voice carried over the heads of the crowd. Immediate family only for the graveside service, she announced. The congregation parted, creating a heavy silence as everyone stared, waiting. The air was thick with judgment. I am still his daughter, I said, every word clear and deliberate, whether you choose to recognize it or not. Micah's spine straightened proudly beside me, my brave boy, witnessing his mother's quiet defiance. I had taught him that strength didn't require shouting. We turned and walked toward the exit. Mr. Norman brushed my elbow lightly. His whisper was so soft it barely disturbed the air between us. He left something for you. Be at the house at 3. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting the floor in rich, jewel-like colors. It was the same sunlight that had once danced across my white dress during my baptism, my first communion, and my wedding. Now, it blessed my path as I walked out of St. Matthew's, head held high, my son's warm hand in mine, knowing that somewhere within those walls, my father had spoken my name. Neither Brooke nor Travis could take that away from me. Instead of attending the service, I went with my son to the hotel. Tomorrow, we would meet at the house that had been my home 11 years ago. As we approached my old childhood home, the morning sun threw long shadows across the brick walkway. Mike's grip tightened around my fingers, his steps faltering as the tall white columns of the front porch came into view, looking just as they had the night I once stood there in the rain. "Mom," Michael whispered, "those people don't look happy to see us." A wall of black-clad figures blocked the front steps. Brooke stood at the center, her pearl necklace flashing in the light. Travis stood to her right, while Aunt Patricia and Uncle James filled in the spaces behind them. Through the windows, cousins and family friends watched us, their faces pressed to the glass like curious children at a carnival. "The reading is for legitimate heirs only," Brooke called out, her voice slicing through the spring air as sharply as a winter wind. "You forfeited that right 11 years ago." My fingers brushed the letter in my pocket, the attorney's letter, its paper strangely warm against my skin, as if it were alive. Mr. Crane had made a point to request my presence. "Of course he did," Travis muttered as he took a step forward, his polished shoes squeaking against the wood of the porch. "But this is still private property," he added. Behind us, the slam of a car door announced the arrival of more family members, drawn here to witness the spectacle of the prodigal daughter's return. I heard a whispered, "Shameless," followed by another quiet voice saying, "Gold digger." The words drifted toward us on the soft April breeze, like tiny dandelion seeds. "You shouldn't have brought the mistake," Brooke said, her gaze locking onto Mike. Old fury surged in my chest, burning hot and sharp as it always had, but Mike's hand in mine grounded me, his grip reminding me of our purpose. I slowly pulled the letter from my pocket, unfolding it with care. "Actually, I have been legally summoned," I said, my voice steady and strong, "by Walter James Moore's personal attorney." Travis moved even closer, attempting to loom over us with his height, the same bullying tactic he had used when we were kids fighting over the television remote. "Listen to your little sister. Let them in." Aunt Margaret's voice sliced through the heavy silence. She emerged from behind the wall of gathered relatives, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "This house belongs to Elizabeth, too. Or have you already forgotten your mother?" The group shifted awkwardly. Someone let out a nervous cough. Brooke's perfectly outlined lips flattened into a bloodless smile. "Fine, but don't expect." "I don't expect anything," I cut in, steering Mike up the steps, placing myself between him and Travis, following the simple courtesy of honoring our father's final wishes. The foyer smelled sharply of lemon polish and lilies. The grandfather clock still ticked hollowly, marking each passing second just as it had counted down my departure years ago. Family portraits covered the walls, carefully curated images that erased any trace of a middle daughter. Attorney Crane was waiting in the study, his briefcase spread open across Father's mahogany desk. Travis's broken yet confident expressions as they sank into the leather chairs made my stomach knot. They'd had 11 years, 11 long years to secure their place in the inheritance, whispering poison into father's ear about his ungrateful daughter. "Now then," Crane said, his voice bearing the quiet authority that came from decades of handling family matters. "Before we begin the reading, there's something Walter wanted you all to see." He lifted a small video player from his case. Brooke's smile faltered. Travis leaned forward, his fingers tapping restlessly against the arm of the chair. The screen flickered, and father's face filled the frame. Older than I remembered, his features lined deeply, his hair completely white. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice raspier and higher than the one I remembered, "then I've finally run out of opportunities to say these things in person." He cleared his throat. "Lindsay, if you're here, it means you're braver than I ever was." The air rushed out of my lungs. Micah instinctively pressed closer. "You left because you needed to live." Father's gaze seemed to pierce through the screen. "I wasn't there when you needed me the most. I didn't open the door. But you kept sending money, through Norman. You never stopped being my daughter, even when I failed to be your father." Brooke made a choked noise. The video shifted, showing a framed crayon drawing, stick figures and bright flowers beneath a yellow sun. "I looked at it every day," father said softly. "My grandson inherited your mother's gift, seeing beauty in the simplest things." My eyes blurred, but I blinked rapidly, refusing to cry. Father's face reappeared on the screen, his tone firm. "Now, regarding the matter of inheritance. To my daughter, Lindsay," he said, "I leave the Richmond family home, currently valued at $430,000, along with my savings account containing $145,000. "What?" Travis exploded, jumping to his feet and knocking over his chair. "In addition," father continued, "I have created a college fund for my grandson, Micah, totaling $90,000. Brooke's face twisted in disbelief. "To my other children, Brooke and Travis," father said steadily, "I leave $15,000 each, as well as the right to choose personal mementos from my study." "He wasn't in his right mind," Travis muttered darkly. Travis's fist crashed down onto the desk. "We took care of him," he muttered. "We were here." Attorney Crane opened his briefcase again. "I have here a full psychological evaluation conducted 3 months ago, which certifies Walter's mental competence." "But the money she sent," Brooke's voice wavered. "It was guilt money, trying to buy her way back in." Mr. Norman, standing in the corner, stepped forward. A manila envelope appeared in his hands. "I have 11 years of payment receipts, each one arriving without fail, like clockwork," he said. "Your sister ensured your father's utilities were always paid. She never missed a single one, even when times were hard." The room seemed to spin. I steadied myself against the bookshelf, my fingers grazing the familiar spines. A flash of color caught my attention. Above my father's desk hung Micah's picture, carefully matted and professionally framed. It was positioned in a way that anyone sitting at the desk would see it with every glance upward. My fingers traced the glass over Micah's childish signature. A lock of hair fell from my head, leaving a dark spot on my sleeve.
"Mom."
"Mike." His voice was soft beside me. "Are you okay?" The question reverberated across 11 years of silence, across rainy nights and carefully addressed envelopes with no return address, across all the unspoken words. My father and I had never found the courage to speak them. I touched the frame again, feeling the shape of forgiveness beneath my fingers. "I think I finally am." 3 days later, after I returned home and endured my siblings' constant pestering from the porch of my childhood home, I watched Brooke and Travis huddle with their attorney on the front steps. Their voices carried across the yard, angry whispers punctuated by sharp gestures toward the house. "My house now," Travis spat. The morning sun caught the gleam of his wedding ring as he pointed sharply at a document. "Your father wasn't in his right mind." The attorney's voice floated above the buzzing chorus of cicadas. "We can prove it." A familiar tightness gripped my chest. 11 years ago, I had stood on these same steps, my arms aching from holding newborn Micah. Now, my son slept upstairs in what had once been my childhood bedroom, his sketchbook resting open on the nightstand. The screen door creaked behind me. Mr. Norman stepped outside, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. "You should know what they're saying in town," he said. "Tell me." "Travis called the Richmond Herald this morning. He told them you abandoned your father during his illness. Said you're a gold digger, coming back only for the inheritance. I pressed my palm against the warm porch railing, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingers. The same railing where Mom used to hang Christmas lights, the same one where she had taught me how to deadhead her prized roses. That's not the worst of it, Mr. Norman continued. Brooke's been changing the locks while you've been at the cemetery. And the whispers at church. He shook his head. What whispers? That you never cared about Walter. That the only reason you sent money was to ease your conscience. A cardinal landed on Mom's old bird feeder, its brilliant red feathers contrasting sharply against the weathered wood. I had spent 11 years carrying the weight of that night in the rain, the sound of my father's door closing. 11 years of quiet support through Mr. Norman. I hoped that one day Walter would understand why I had to leave. We need to talk to Dad's doctor, I say, referring to his mental state. Mr. Norman nods. Already scheduled the appointment, and I've kept every receipt from your monthly payments. 11 years of utility bills, never missed a single one. The attorney's voice rises again. We'll file first thing Monday. I turn away from the porch, walking toward the study, where Walter's presence still hangs in the air. The leather chair where he'd sit to read the evening paper, the desk calendar with his neat handwriting, these things make it feel as if he's still here. Above the desk hangs a simple crayon drawing by Micah, framed with care. I open the bottom drawer and find Walter's journal, its pages filled with his strong, slanting script. One entry catches my eye. I saw Lindsay today at the hospital. She thought I was sleeping. My girl looked tired, but her shoulders were straight, just like her mother's. The entry ends abruptly, a water stain blurring the final words. A knock at the door pulls me away from the journal. Aunt Margaret stands there, clutching her pocketbook, ready to help with this endless fight. Those vipers are still out there plotting, she says as she steps inside. But I've got something they don't know about. She settles into Mom's old armchair, smoothing her skirt. Your father talked about you, Lindsay, she continues, her voice soft. Every Sunday after church, over coffee and pecan pie. He kept a photo of you from your college graduation in his wallet. Said you were the only one who inherited your mother's strength. My throat tightens. He never told me. Aunt Margaret shakes her head. Men of his generation think silence is strength. But he was proud of you, especially after Mrs. Pearson told him about your work at the library. Do you know why he chose Amazing Grace for his funeral? It was your mother's favorite hymn, the one she sang while you helped her in the garden. A car door slams outside. Voices rise. I move to the window just in time to see Travis stumbling toward his Mercedes, his tie loosened and his face flushed. He's shouting at a man with a notebook, likely a reporter. She bewitched him somehow. Travis's words carry across the lawn. Our father would never. Brooke rushes after him, her makeup cracking as she screams at the reporter to leave. The attorney stands off to the side, clutching his briefcase, watching his clients unravel in the morning sun. The truth always finds its way to the surface. Aunt Margaret speaks softly, almost like the cream in coffee. I think it's time you know. I return to Walter's desk, my fingers grazing the smooth surface. Something catches my attention under the bottom edge, a taped envelope with my name scrawled in Walter's shaky handwriting. What will you do with it? Aunt Margaret asks. The envelope feels heavy in my hands, burdened with the words my father never could say in life. I watch my siblings retreat to their cars through the window, leaving their attorney alone on the sidewalk. He pauses, staring up at the house for a long moment before pulling out his phone. I turn to Aunt Margaret and quietly say, some truths need to be spoken, even if it's late. A floorboard creaks upstairs. Micah is stirring from his nap. Soon he'll come downstairs, asking about lunch, or maybe showing me a new dream. My son, who has never known rejection, who fills blank pages with gardens he's never seen. I slip the envelope into my pocket, saving it for when I'm ready. Some wounds need time before they can be faced in the light of day. But right now, the weight of it against my hip feels like the start of something. Aunt Margaret stands and touches my shoulder as she passes. Your mother would be proud of how you've handled this. Both of them would be. The morning sun streams through the study windows, warming the leather of Walter's chair. Outside, a cardinal still perches on Mom's bird feeder, singing its bright song into the Virginia air. I think of all the mornings she spent filling that feeder, telling me how birds remember kindness, how they always return home the next day. Brooke and Travis arrived just as the sun began to set, each carrying a time-worn cardboard box packed with photo albums. As they opened the albums on the kitchen table, the cracked leather bindings released a musty aroma, like the scent of forgotten memories. "Look," Brooke said, her voice trembling slightly. She pointed to a Polaroid of 3 children on a tire swing. "Do you remember this? The old oak tree behind the Methodist church." I kept my hands folded in my lap, silently watching as Brooke's well-manicured finger traced the edge of the photograph. The memory rose to the surface on its own. Travis pushing the swing too hard, the rope snapping, and then Mom rushing over, Band-Aids in hand, kissing away the pain. "Dad would have wanted us to be family again," Brooke added, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She had rehearsed this moment, I could tell, from the way her voice caught at just the right time and the careful dab at her eyes with her monogrammed handkerchief. Travis leaned forward, the fabric of his suit jacket straining over his broad shoulders. "We've been thinking," he said, glancing at Brooke before returning his gaze to me. "What Dad really meant was that we should share everything equally. The house, the account split 3 ways just like when we were kids." The silence that followed felt stretched, thick like taffy, sweet but artificial. Through the window, I saw Micah sitting under the maple tree, sketching in his notebook, in the same spot where Mom used to hang the laundry. "I found something," I said, reaching into my cardigan pocket. The envelope had softened from being handled for hours, the delicate sprawl of Walter's handwriting on the front. Brooke stiffened. "What's that?" she demanded. I broke the seal, unfolding the pages, the paper rustling against my fingers. The words wavered for a moment before coming into focus. "I watched you from afar." Through Norman's eyes. I read the words aloud. The ticking of the kitchen clock filled the silence, each second marking another revelation. When your money arrived, I couldn't bear my own cowardice. Travis's grip tightened around his coffee mug, his knuckles pale. "The day I learned you came during my stroke, I cried myself to sleep." The words hung in the air, trembling. A car door slammed outside, followed by a distant rumble of thunder. If your mom hadn't laughed, maybe he wouldn't have died alone. Brooke's voice cracked like a lightning strike across the kitchen. Micah appeared in the doorway, clutching his sketchbook to his chest. His eyes flicked nervously between us, then he turned and ran, the screen door slamming behind him. Rain began to fall in heavy, steady drops as I hurried after him. The path was marked by wet spots where his footsteps had left their imprint, leading to the old metal awning where I used to sit with my books. Micah huddled there, shaking, the sketchbook pressed tightly to his side. I sat beside him, water soaking through my jeans as the awning thrummed with the sound of rain, the same hollow music it had made 25 years ago. "Your grandfather made mistakes," I whispered, pulling him close, inhaling the scent of pencil shavings and apple-scented shampoo. "But I still loved him. I've never once regretted walking away with you." The storm passed quickly, leaving behind puddles that reflected the breaking clouds. When we returned to the kitchen, Margaret stood by the stove, stirring a pot of hot chocolate. The familiar smell of Hershey's cocoa and vanilla wrapped around us like a comforting blanket. Mr. Norman entered with Walter's old Afghan, the one Mom had crocheted during her last winter. He draped it gently over Micah's shoulders with the same tender hands that had once passed Walter's monthly payments to him for 11 years. The doorbell rang, and Mrs. Pearson entered, carrying a covered casserole dish, the steam escaping as she lifted the lid. "Just like I used to make for your mother," she said, her voice laced with nostalgia. "She always adored my chicken and dumplings." Travis slouched at the table, the fight draining from him as if it had been poured away. "He always liked you best," he murmured, his words dissolving into bitter tears. "Even after everything?" Brooke's admission hung heavy in the stillness of the kitchen. Mascara streaked her cheeks, leaving dark trails. I stirred my hot chocolate absent-mindedly, watching the marshmallows slowly melt and swirl into the creamy liquid. The walls of the old kitchen held echoes of countless words, spoken and unspoken, harsh and tender, lost and found. "I never wanted his money," I said quietly. Steam rose from my cup in delicate tendrils, like the faint trace of incense. "I just wanted him to see me." A cardinal landed on the windowsill, a vibrant red against the rain-streaked glass. I remembered how Mother had always said that cardinals were messengers from heaven. I watched it hop once, twice, and then take flight, soaring into the clearing sky. Micah's pencil scratched against a sketchpad, capturing the fleeting moment with gentle, careful strokes. The Afghan slipped from Mr. Norman's shoulder, and he gently adjusted it. Mrs. Pearson hummed softly as she served bowls of dumplings, the tune a comforting memory of childhood summers. Aunt Margaret reached out and touched my hand, her fingers warm, liver-spotted, and steady. Across the room, Brooke and Travis sat apart, their carefully maintained facades crumbling to dust, leaving only the frightened children they had always been. The vivid red of the cardinal remained in my mind, like the afterimage of hope lingering just out of reach. Sometimes, I thought forgiveness wasn't a single defining moment, but 1,000 small mercies. A bowl of chicken and dumplings, a borrowed blanket, the shelter of an old awning in the rain. "Would you like more hot chocolate?" Aunt Margaret asked Micah, and he nodded as she poured, her hands steady in the same way they had once taught me how to hold a teacup as a child. The marshmallows bobbed in the steaming drink, spinning like tiny white stars in a sky of rich chocolate. The days ahead would bring more storms, more words, and more wounds to heal. But tonight, in this kitchen filled with broken people trying their best to heal, I felt the first fragile threads of peace beginning to weave themselves together as the last rays of sunset painted the puddles cold and quiet. 3 days later, the key turned in the lock with a satisfying click behind me. Michael bounced on his toes, clutching his art supplies to his chest. We stood in the foyer of what was now our home, my thoughts still tangled in my throat, as if they were caught on a fishing hook. "Can I set up in the sunroom?" he asked, his voice echoing in the emptiness of the bare walls. "The light's perfect for painting," he added. I nodded, watching him walk down the hallway, his footsteps stirring up little clouds of dust that danced in the shafts of morning sunlight. The house had been closed up since the funeral, but beneath the lingering disarray, I caught the familiar scent of furniture polish and Walter's pipe tobacco. I opened the windows one by one, their hinges protesting, and fresh spring air rushed in, bringing with it the earthy scent of awakening soil from Mother's garden. I stopped by the kitchen window, lost in a memory of her standing here, washing dishes, softly humming hymns while keeping an eye on the cardinals at the feeder near the shed. Her gardening gloves, faded green canvas, still hung on their hook, the fingers curled as if awaiting her hands. I slid them on, and they fit as if they had been made for me. The flower beds, however, had become overgrown since her passing. Weeds had intertwined with the heritage roses, strangling the delicate blooms she had once nurtured with such care. Yet beneath the winter's fallen debris, fresh green shoots were pushing upwards toward the sunlight. The bulbs she had planted many years ago still remembered their purpose. "Mom," Mike's voice called from the sunroom. "Come look." He had set up his easel in the corner where my mother's had once stood. His pencils were neatly arranged on the windowsill in a rainbow, just like how she had arranged her pastels. I hadn't shared that small detail about her with him. "I'm drawing the bird out there," he said, pointing to a sparrow hopping among the petals. "Do you think Grandma Elizabeth would have liked my art?" "She would have loved it," I replied, my voice trembling. She always said that art was how we capture light. Later, I found myself tackling the task of sorting through my old bedroom. The walls were still the pale yellow I had chosen when I was 16. My fingers traced the pencil marks behind the door where I had measured my height until I went off to college. The lowest mark was in my mother's handwriting. Lindsay, age 5. The mattress creaked as I sank down onto it, the springs singing an old, familiar tune. Outside my window, the massive oak tree filtered sunlight through its new leaves. How many nights had I spent here, watching the shadows it cast dance across my ceiling? Mr. Norman arrived at dusk, carrying a cardboard box tied with twine. "Found these in Walter's study," he said as he set the box down on the kitchen counter. I think you should have them inside. Inside the box, I found old newspaper clippings, one about my promotion at the library, another about a summer reading program I had helped organize. There were birthday cards that Walter had written but never sent, their envelopes sealed and stamped, untouched. There was also a letter in his shaky handwriting. From that day on, it read, "I stopped calling you a disgrace and started calling you my daughter again. Every month when your money came, I knew I'd failed you, not the other way around." Before I could read more, the doorbell rang. Aunt Margaret stood on the porch, a casserole dish in hand. Mrs. Pearson waved from her car. "I hope you don't mind," Aunt Margaret said, "but it's Sunday, family dinner tradition." Micah set the table with the old china while I reheated Margaret's chicken and dumplings. The kitchen was filled with the sounds I remembered from childhood, forks clinking, ice cubes settling in glasses, the hum of comfortable conversation flowing like honey. "Show them your new drawing, honey," I called to Micah. He proudly displayed his sketch, a sparrow sheltering under a rose leaf during a summer shower. Mrs. Pearson clasped her hands, and Mr. Norman nodded in approval. "You've got your grandmother's eye," he said. Aunt Margaret added, "She could always find beauty in the simple moments." After the guests had left, I stood in the garden as evening settled over Richmond. My mother's roses had survived, scattered yet resilient, thriving with time and care. They would flourish once more. From the windows behind me, soft lamplight poured out, casting its glow onto the lawn. The house felt transformed now. It was no longer just a building. It felt warm, inviting, alive with potential. "Mom," Micah's voice called from the back door. "Can you help me with this math problem?" A smile crossed my face as I inhaled the cool night air. The garden could wait. In this moment, my son needed me. And for the first time since returning to Richmond, that simple reality felt like everything I needed. As I walked toward the house, I softly spoke words I had kept buried for 11 years. He finally recognized me. The porch light flickered to life, its glow the final gift Walter had left behind. Micah hunched over his homework at the kitchen table, sitting in the very spot where I used to do the same. The sight of it stirred a longing deep inside me, a feeling so bittersweet it could hardly be called pain. We had arrived. Not the house of my childhood, but something entirely new. Something that belonged to us.